Here's your wrestling news for April 18th, 2021. And if you like what you're watching, smash that like button and give us 1,000 likes or more. And your headlines for today include WWE told certain superstars not to show up at Wrestlemania. Mojo Rawley comments on WWE release, teases future plans. Backstage news on how WWE sees Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair. SmackDown plans changed. Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair allegedly faked the crying spots at WWE Wrestlemania. Keith Lee says he will fight like no other for WWE return. Lee's next opponent is revealed. Mickie James tried out for new WWE role before getting released. WWE wrestler to turn face and align with Drew McIntyre. Status of Samoa Joe's ring name after WWE release. Tucker blasts Vince McMahon for not allowing fun WWE storylines. Corey Graves talks Michael Cole's botch at WrestleMania 37 main event, and more. We're kicking off today with Raw, and if you noticed something was missing from the post-WrestleMania show, then you're not alone. Fightful Select reports that WWE was short-handed after WrestleMania, with many superstars who competed at Mania banged up and not medically cleared. One notable change was Bobby Lashley vs. Riddle, a match that wasn't in the show's original plans, but was penciled in because WWE didn't have anyone else for the WWE Champion. It's also reported that some superstars couldn't attend the Thunderdome for the post-Mania Raw due to quarantine guidelines, but WWE did the best they could with a limited roster. Did you notice a change on this week's Raw? Let us know in the comments. Despite being shorthanded with superstars this week, WWE chose to release 10 wrestlers this past Thursday, a year to the day of the April 15, 2020 cuts. Whilst these releases came as a shock to the fans, WWE had already sowed the seeds amongst the roster, as Fightful reports that certain superstars were told not to attend WrestleMania, with Chelsea Green and Mojo Rawley being told not to attend the show in order to, quote, streamline things. It's interesting that WWE told superstars this, as Night 1 opened with a ton of superstars on the ramp, including many superstars who didn't get used during WrestleMania. Green was reportedly scheduled to attend SmackDown this week, though that obviously didn't happen, and after being told not to attend WWE's biggest show of the year with a flimsy at best reason by the company, her release may not have been all too surprising to the former WWE superstar. AEW news next, as a TNT title match has been added to next week's Dynamite. Following an interaction on Twitter, it's been confirmed that Darby Allin will defend against Jungle Boy in what'll be AEW's second Dynamite after the Wednesday Night War. Back to WWE, and Mojo Rawley was one of this week's released superstars, and whilst a 90-day non-compete clause is in effect, the Hype Man has teased what his next plans are. On Twitter, the former 24/7 champion said the next chapter of his life will officially begin on May 31st, which is before the 90-day non-compete clause expires. If something big is happening next month, then that means it's probably something outside of wrestling, as he can't do anything with any other wrestling promotion just yet. Of course, it's also possible that Rawley could return to the ring after the 90-day clause expires, and his real-life friendship with Matt Cardona may open the door for him with Impact Wrestling. Whatever the case, the 34-year-old Rawley has plenty of opportunities ahead of him, and time will tell what May 31st brings the former WWE superstar. This was the second year in a row that WWE has released talent on April 15th, and while that's bad news for the wrestlers, it's good news for Impact Wrestling. On Twitter, Scott D'Amore noted that WWE releasing stars in mid-April guarantees that wrestlers will be available from early July, just in time for their annual Slammiversary pay-per-view. Impact made the most of last year's releases by having EC3, Gallows and Anderson, Heath Slater, and others show up, and it seems that the company is ready to do the exact same thing for this year's Slammiversary after the April 2021 cuts. One man who doesn't need to fear being released is Roman Reigns, but whilst he retained his Universal Championship at WrestleMania, he also lost something very important. That's according to Justin Barrasso of Sports Illustrated, who reports that following the WrestleMania Night 1 main event between Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, that their feud is now considered the top story in the entire WWE behind the scenes, with Reigns' work a close second. Barasso's report also noted that Banks was meant to confront Belair during last Friday's SmackDown, but those plans were changed, and it's believed that this confrontation has been pushed back a week to let Belair celebrate her SmackDown Women's title win. WWE did make it clear with a backstage promo that the boss isn't finished with Belair, and given that this is now WWE's top feud, expect to see plenty of both women in the coming months. Given how important it is to headline Wrestlemania, it's hardly surprising that both women were emotional during their SmackDown Women's title match, but were they too emotional? That's what John Cena Sr., the father of the former WWE champion, believes, as while speaking to Boston Wrestling's Dan Murad, Cena Sr. made a huge accusation. Who wrote that session for the young ladies to come in and start crying? Somebody had to write it. No, I don't believe that the crying was real. Yes, 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 yes. Banks and Belair were instructed to cry. This opinion isn't shared with the majority of the fans, as it's no secret that Banks and Belair are emotional people, as both women have shed tears following huge wins in their respective careers. It's also worth noting that Cena didn't give any evidence of the fake crying theory, other than it's what he believes, and given the focus this storyline is getting, we're sure this isn't the last we've heard from Big Cry John. Though he was once rumored to be main eventing WrestleMania, Keith Lee was nowhere to be seen during last weekend's festivities. Given that he hasn't competed in over 2 months, many fans were surprised that Lee wasn't part of WWE's recent cuts, and Lee is promising to be back. On Twitter, the former NXT champion promised to fight like no other to return, and whilst this seems like a step in the right direction, it'll be interesting to see how WWE books the Limitless One upon his return, whenever that'll be. Speaking of Lee, the Limitless One had to watch as Sheamus captured the US title during WrestleMania 37, a title that was seemingly destined for him earlier this year, and now Lee could get another shot at the title. During this week's Raw, many fans expected many more returns and surprises than we got, with some speculating that the former NXT champion would confront Sheamus on the post-Mania Raw. That didn't happen, and Lee, now calling himself Impatient Lee on Twitter, is waiting to return, and we feel a program with the new US champion starting tomorrow night would be what's best. A feud between them would be more about fists flying than flips and dives, though we know Lee can use aerial attacks, and after months of start-stop pushes and a lengthy absence, going over the prestigious US title is something the Limitless One needs to do, and do soon. One superstar who was given the dreaded pink slip was Mickie James, who was cut after going unused by the company for months. Outside of a short stint in the Women's Royal Rumble, James' last match was on the September 21st Raw, losing to Zelina Vega mere months before Vega's own release for supporting unions. In the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer explained WWE's rationale for cutting the popular former women's champion, saying, "Wrestling is a cosmetic business, perhaps less now than in the past in some cases, and especially for women, but it still partially is. Her not being used and her age made her a prime target to be cut. She did get tryouts to be a television announcer, but that didn't go anywhere." Though WWE did have Mickie work commentary during the NXT Stand and Deliver kickoff show, she clearly didn't impress the right people, though we imagine there's no shortage of promotions eager to sign the legendary women's wrestler. If you've listened to any recent interviews from Sean Waltman, you'll know the two-time Hall of Famer still wants to wrestle before retiring, and that's a match Sami Zayn would love to have. On the anniversary of King of Trios Night 3, where El Generico and Waltman tore it up, Zayn tweeted that he actually asked WWE if he could face the former X-Pac at SummerSlam 2 years ago, but WWE said no. Zayn didn't explain why WWE said no, and given how epic a feud between the two would be, we're hoping WWE circles back around to that idea in the near future. One person fans won't see is Samoa Joe, who was cut this week, and given WWE's history of trademarking everything on their programming, there's been some questions as to whether the former NXT champion can even call himself Samoa Joe, despite using the name in TNA. Whilst WWE does try and trademark everything they can, they don't own the Samoa Joe name, according to a report from Heel by Nature, as they reported, Sanoa Nufalo Joel, Samoa Joe's real name, owns trademarks for his in-ring name under a number of different classifications. He will be able to use the name in the future. It appears that Samoa Joe can be Samoa Joe wherever he goes. That's not the case for every other WWE release, with the exception of Mickie James, but the company also filed a trademark on her name. Back to Raw, and with Retribution aligning with the Hurt Business this week, Drew McIntyre is severely outnumbered in his quest to regain the WWE Championship, but may soon get an assist from an unlikely source. According to Wade Keller of Pro Wrestling Torch, WWE Creative is thinking of bringing in Mustafa Ali and aligning him with Drew McIntyre after Retribution turned on their leader at Fastlane. WWE has always refused to go all the way with Mustafa Ali, whether it was as the SmackDown hacker or the leader of Retribution, and it may simply be easier and safer for him to revert back to being a babyface, albeit one who wants revenge on his former friends. Mustafa Ali and Drew McIntyre could be a powerhouse team going forward, and to avoid messing up the high flyer for a third time, an alliance with the Scotsman could be what's needed to rehabilitate his character. More release news as Tucker hasn't kept quiet since his release and isn't holding back either. Now that he's no longer a superstar, Tucker isn't afraid to take shots at the company, and when one fan asked why Heavy Machinery was split, he replied with an un-PG response, "Who knows?" When another fan said WWE fans aren't allowed nice things, Tucker fired back saying, "Not with a certain old man in charge," as the former WWE superstar evidently doesn't want to go back to Vince McMahon's promotion anytime soon. And we're ending with more news from Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, as their epic Wrestlemania encounter had an awkward finish. When Belair got the pin, Michael Cole thought the match was meant to continue, and said that Banks kicked out when that evidently wasn't the case. A huge botch for the veteran WWE commentator to make, this botch was addressed by Corey Graves on After the Bell, who said Cole felt terrible about it. He added, "I almost thought the same thing. From our vantage point, it was not crystal clear." Graves also joked that given the amount of time superstars kick out of each other's finishers, it's not hard to see why Cole thought this would be another kick out. And whilst this mistake doesn't make Belair's win any less important, it's something fans didn't want to hear. Well guys, that's our news for today. Please share your comments below. Also hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to receive all notifications. And as always, thanks for watching.